Museum guide Elena Rodriguez had a very simple life at the Metropolitan Art Museum. She arrived at 9 a.m., left at 6 p.m. She talked to visitors, told them about art history, but that night when Europe's most dangerous thieves came to steal $100 million worth of art, they had no idea that learning who Elena really was would turn everything upside down. The Metropolitan Museum of Fine Arts stood as one of Chicago's most prestigious cultural institutions, its neoclassical facade and marble columns housing one of the world's most valuable collections of European masterpieces, contemporary works, and ancient artifacts that attracted over 2 million visitors annually from around the globe. The museum's reputation for acquiring and displaying exceptional art had made it a destination for art lovers, students, researchers, and tourists who came to experience humanity's greatest creative achievements in person. The museum's collection included works by Van Gogh, Monet, Picasso, Rembrandt, and dozens of other masters whose paintings were worth tens of millions of dollars each, making the facility not just a cultural treasure, but also a high-security environment that required sophisticated protection systems to safeguard priceless artifacts from theft, damage, and other threats that constantly endangered valuable art collections around the world. Among the dozens of staff members who worked throughout the museum's galleries, administrative offices, and educational programs was Elena Rodriguez, a 34-year-old woman who had been employed as a senior tour guide for the past 8 years. To the thousands of visitors who had participated in her tours and the colleagues who worked alongside her daily, Elena appeared to be exactly what her job title suggested, a knowledgeable art historian with exceptional communication skills and genuine passion for sharing the stories behind the museum's most important works. Elena's approach to museum tours was comprehensive and engaging in ways that distinguished her from other guides who might provide routine information from prepared scripts. She demonstrated deep understanding of artistic techniques, historical contexts, cultural significance, and biographical details about artists that suggested extensive education in art history and related disciplines that went far beyond what would be required for standard tour guide positions. Her language skills were particularly impressive, as she could conduct tours in English, Spanish, French, Italian, and German, making her invaluable for international visitors and special groups that required multilingual interpretation. Her ability to adapt her presentations to different audiences, from elementary school children to university professors, demonstrated communication expertise that suggested training and experience beyond what most museum educators possessed. What none of Elena's colleagues or the thousands of visitors who had enjoyed her tours knew was that her position at the Metropolitan Museum was not a career choice based on passion for art history, but rather a carefully constructed cover identity that concealed her true profession and the real reason she had been placed in one of Chicago's most important cultural institutions 8 years earlier. Elena Rodriguez was not just a museum tour guide with advanced knowledge of art history. She was Agent Elena Rodriguez, a 12-year veteran of Interpol's art crime team with extensive experience in international investigations involving stolen art, cultural property trafficking, and criminal organizations that specialized in acquiring and selling masterpieces through illegal means that generated billions of dollars annually for sophisticated criminal networks. Her law enforcement background included specialized training in art authentication, cultural property law, international criminal investigation, and undercover operations that had taken her to museums, auction houses, private collections, and criminal organizations throughout Europe, Asia, and the Americas, where she had worked to recover stolen masterpieces and arrest the criminals who profited from cultural theft. The decision to place Elena in a long-term undercover assignment at the Metropolitan Museum had been made at the highest levels of international law enforcement cooperation, based on intelligence indicating that several major art theft organizations were planning coordinated attacks against American museums that housed European masterpieces worth hundreds of millions of dollars that could be sold through black market networks to private collectors who cared more about possession than legitimacy. Elena's mission was to serve as an early warning system for potential art theft attempts while maintaining her cover as museum staff, ready to coordinate international law enforcement response if situations arose that threatened the museum's collection or revealed the activities of criminal organizations that Interpol had been tracking for years across multiple continents. The sophisticated nature of Elena's cover identity required her to actually perform tour guide duties at an expert level, which meant she had undergone intensive training in art history, museum operations, educational techniques, and public speaking to ensure that her cover would withstand scrutiny from museum management, art scholars, and visitors who might possess advanced knowledge of the works in the museum's collection. For 8 years, Elena had successfully maintained her dual role without incident. She had provided intelligence reports that had contributed to the recovery of dozens of stolen artworks, identified suspicious visitors who were conducting surveillance for potential thefts, and gathered information about international art crime networks that had enhanced Interpol's ability to track and arrest criminals who specialized in cultural property theft. Elena's daily routine at the Metropolitan Museum provided ideal cover for her law enforcement activities. The constant interaction with international visitors gave her opportunities to identify individuals who might be associated with art theft organizations, while her position as a senior guide allowed her to monitor all areas of the museum and observe activities that might indicate reconnaissance for potential criminal operations. Her extensive knowledge of the museum's collection, security systems, staff procedures, and visitor patterns made her an invaluable intelligence asset who could immediately recognize when something was unusual or potentially threatening, while her established relationships with museum staff ensured that she could access information and coordinate responses without arousing suspicion about her true role. The case that would ultimately expose Elena's true identity began when intelligence reports from Interpol headquarters in Lyon indicated that Viktor Kozlov, the leader of Europe's most sophisticated art theft organization, had been spotted in Chicago conducting surveillance activities near several major cultural institutions, including the Metropolitan Museum, the Chicago Institute of Arts, and several high-end galleries that housed valuable European paintings. Kozlov's organization was responsible for some of the most audacious art thefts in recent history, including the theft of paintings worth over $50 million from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, the disappearance of Van Gogh works from museums in Amsterdam and Paris, and numerous other high-profile crimes that had generated international attention and massive law enforcement efforts to recover the stolen works. Intelligence reports suggested that Kozlov was planning what he called his retirement heist, a coordinated theft of multiple masterpieces from American museums that would provide him with enough money to disappear permanently while flooding the black market with stolen art that would take decades for law enforcement agencies to track and recover through traditional investigation methods. The Metropolitan Museum appeared to be Kozlov's primary target because of its collection of post-impressionist masterpieces, including Van Gogh's Starry Night over Chicago, valued at over $60 million, Monet's Water Lilies in Winter, worth $40 million, and Picasso's Blue Period Portrait, estimated at $30 million, paintings that together represented over $100 million in art that could be sold to private collectors who specialized in acquiring masterpieces, regardless of their legitimate ownership status. Elena had been briefed about the potential threat through encrypted communications from Interpol headquarters, but her cover identity prevented her from taking any obvious security measures that might alert Kozlov's organization to the fact that law enforcement was aware of their activities and had placed undercover agents in positions where they could monitor and respond to attempted thefts. For 3 weeks, Elena had conducted her regular tours while maintaining enhanced awareness of visitors who might be conducting reconnaissance, paying particular attention to individuals who showed unusual interest in security systems, staff procedures, or the specific paintings that intelligence reports had identified as likely targets for Kozlov's planned theft operation. The museum's security staff had been quietly alerted to potential threats through channels that did not compromise Elena's cover, but they were unaware that one of their tour guides was actually an international law enforcement agent with authority to coordinate responses that went far beyond what local security measures could provide. On the night that would change everything, Elena was conducting her final tour of the day for a small group of international visitors when the museum's security systems detected unauthorized entry into the building through a service entrance that should have been secured after normal operating hours. The intrusion occurred at approximately 9:30 p.m., 30 minutes after the museum had officially closed to the public. The security breach triggered automated responses that included locking down the building, activating motion sensors throughout the galleries, and notifying local law enforcement about the potential break-in. But the intruders had sophisticated equipment that disabled many of the museum's electronic security measures and prevented immediate communication with police dispatch centers. Elena realized immediately that the break-in was not a random criminal activity, but likely the beginning of Kozlov's planned art theft operation, and she made the decision to implement emergency protocols that would identify her as an Interpol agent while coordinating international law enforcement response to what appeared to be one of the most significant art crimes in American history. Using encrypted communication devices that she had maintained throughout her 8 years of undercover work, Elena contacted Interpol's operations center and provided real-time intelligence about the break-in, while positioning herself to observe and document the criminal activities that were unfolding throughout the museum's galleries. The theft operation was indeed sophisticated and well-planned, involving 4 individuals who had gained access to the museum through multiple entry points and were systematically moving toward the galleries that housed the most valuable paintings on Kozlov's target list. Their equipment included electronic devices for disabling security systems, specialized tools for removing paintings from their frames and protective cases, and communication systems that allowed them to coordinate their activities while monitoring police radio frequencies. Elena's training in undercover operations and art crime investigation allowed her to recognize the professional nature of the theft attempt and the specific techniques being used by criminals who had obviously studied the museum's layout, security systems, and collection extensively before attempting their break-in. As the thieves moved through the galleries toward their target paintings, Elena shadowed their activities while providing real-time intelligence to Interpol coordinators who were working with FBI agents and local law enforcement to surround the museum and prevent the criminals from escaping with stolen masterpieces worth over $100 million. The confrontation that would reveal Elena's true identity occurred when she encountered Viktor Kozlov himself in the gallery that housed Van Gogh's Starry Night over Chicago, the centerpiece of his planned theft, and the painting that would provide the greatest financial return if successfully stolen and sold through black market channels to private collectors who specialized in acquiring famous works, regardless of their ownership status. Kozlov was in the process of carefully removing the Van Gogh from its climate-controlled display case when Elena appeared in the gallery doorway, apparently having been trapped in the museum during the break-in, and discovered wandering the halls while trying to find an exit during what appeared to be a routine security incident. "Please, I'm just a tour guide," Elena said, approaching Kozlov with apparent fear and confusion about the situation. "I was working late on educational materials when the alarms went off. I don't know what's happening, but I just want to leave safely." Kozlov looked at Elena with the professional assessment of a career criminal who had learned to evaluate threats and opportunities during decades of art theft operations throughout Europe and America. To him, she appeared to be exactly what she claimed, a museum employee who had been accidentally trapped during his carefully planned operation. "You picked the wrong night to work late," Kozlov replied, continuing his work on the Van Gogh while keeping one eye on Elena. "Just stay quiet and don't interfere, and you'll be able to walk out of here alive when we're finished." However, Elena's years of undercover work had taught her to recognize subtle indicators that revealed the true capabilities and intentions of criminal suspects, and she realized that Kozlov had no intention of allowing witnesses to survive his theft operation. His relaxed demeanor and casual conversation were designed to keep her calm while he completed his work, but his positioning and the way he monitored her movements indicated that he was planning to eliminate her as soon as the painting was secured. The moment of revelation came when Kozlov completed his careful removal of the Van Gogh and turned to face Elena with obvious hostile intentions. As he reached for a weapon that would allow him to eliminate the witness to his crime, Elena's training and experience took over. In a single fluid movement that demonstrated years of tactical training and operational experience, Elena disarmed Kozlov, secured his weapon, and had him in a control hold before he could react to the sudden transformation of the frightened museum employee into a highly trained law enforcement professional. "Viktor Kozlov," Elena said, using her real voice and professional demeanor for the first time in 8 years of undercover work, "you're under arrest by the authority of Interpol for international art theft, conspiracy, and about 50 other charges that are going to put you away for the rest of your life." The shock on Kozlov's face was complete and absolute. For nearly 2 decades, he had been one of Europe's most successful art thieves, evading capture by law enforcement agencies from 6 different countries while building a criminal empire based on stealing and selling masterpieces worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His careful planning and sophisticated reconnaissance had led him to believe that the Metropolitan Museum was an ideal target, with security vulnerabilities that could be exploited to steal valuable paintings without significant risk of capture or identification. The presence of an Interpol agent working undercover as a tour guide had never been considered in his operational planning. "This is impossible," Kozlov said, struggling against Elena's professional restraint techniques. "You've been giving tours here for years. I researched you. You're nobody important." That was the idea, Elena replied, maintaining her control hold while coordinating through her communication device with the international law enforcement teams that were securing the museum and arresting Kozlov's associates throughout the building. 8 years of very convincing nobody. The arrest of Viktor Kozlov and his 3 associates marked the end of one of Interpol's most successful long-term undercover operations and the dismantling of an international art theft network that had been responsible for stealing over $300 million worth of masterpieces from museums, galleries, and private collections throughout Europe and America. Elena's 8 years of undercover work had provided intelligence that led to the recovery of dozens of stolen paintings, the identification of black market networks that facilitated art crime, and the arrest of criminals who had operated with impunity for decades while believing they were beyond the reach of international law enforcement cooperation. The revelation of Elena's true identity had immediate implications for museum security policies and international cooperation in protecting cultural treasures from criminal organizations that viewed priceless art as nothing more than commodities that could be stolen and sold for profit without regard for their cultural significance or historical importance. For Elena, the exposure of her cover identity marked the end of one of Interpol's most successful infiltration operations and the beginning of new assignments that would utilize her expertise in both art crime investigation and undercover work to protect cultural institutions from criminal threats that crossed international boundaries. The museum staff and visitors who had known Elena as a knowledgeable and engaging tour guide gained new understanding of the hidden law enforcement efforts that protected cultural treasures and the dedication of international agents who served without recognition in roles that concealed their true mission to preserve humanity's artistic heritage. Elena's story became a case study within international law enforcement about successful long-term undercover operations and the value of placing experienced agents in positions where they could monitor threats while maintaining cover identities that allowed them to gather intelligence and coordinate responses when criminal organizations targeted cultural institutions. Years later, after Elena had moved on to other assignments that utilized her unique combination of undercover experience and art crime expertise, the international law enforcement community would implement new protocols for protecting museums and cultural institutions based on lessons learned from her 8 years of undercover work at the Metropolitan Museum. Agent Elena Rodriguez had proven that the most effective protection of cultural treasures often came from those who served without acknowledgement, maintaining civilian cover identities while quietly gathering intelligence and remaining ready to act when their law enforcement training and international experience were needed to preserve masterpieces for future generations. The museum guide, who had seemed dedicated to sharing art history, had actually been one of Interpol's most experienced art crime investigators, demonstrating that effective international law enforcement often required agents to serve in roles that concealed their expertise until circumstances demanded their true capabilities to protect cultural heritage from criminal exploitation. Her successful infiltration of Kozlov's organization had shown that international art theft networks could be penetrated and dismantled through the strategic positioning of qualified agents who could provide inside access to criminal planning and evidence that would otherwise be impossible to obtain through conventional investigation methods that were limited by jurisdictional boundaries and diplomatic constraints. The operation had answered international law enforcement's call for enhanced protection of cultural treasures, proving that art crime legends were often hidden among museum employees, ready to reveal their true capabilities when cultural heritage depended on training and experience that could counter threats beyond the scope of routine security measures and traditional law enforcement approaches to protecting humanity's artistic legacy from those who would steal and sell it for personal profit. Museum guide Elena Rodriguez had a very simple life at the Metropolitan Art Museum. She arrived at 9 a.m., left at 6 p.m. She talked to visitors, told them about art history, but that night when Europe's most dangerous thieves came to steal $100 million worth of art, they had no idea that learning who Elena really was would turn everything upside down. The Metropolitan Museum of Fine Arts stood as one of Chicago's most prestigious cultural institutions, its neoclassical facade and marble columns housing one of the world's most valuable collections of European masterpieces, contemporary works, and ancient artifacts that attracted over 2 million visitors annually from around the globe. The museum's reputation for acquiring and displaying exceptional art had made it a destination for art lovers, students, researchers, and tourists who came to experience humanity's greatest creative achievements in person.